My conversation today is with composer, author, and translator Cory C. Aside from composing music and creating and curating spaces and dialogues through social media and digital platforms, Cory is a systems creator, pioneering modes of esoteric composition and analysis of ancient texts. I was delighted to find out that Cory's recently self-published book, A Little Orphic Initiation, grew out of this conversation, and ultimately, of course, Cory's depth of work within the Orphic textual traditions. It was a pleasure getting to know Cory through this candid and highly interesting conversation. I'm Ike Baker, and this is the Arcanum Podcast. As a preview of Cory's style of musical composition, we'll be listening to a piece entitled The Evocation of the Sun. This piece is designed to aid in the practice of planetary magic, and is the second opus from the larger work entitled Wandering Rondos of the Spheres. You can find links to Cory's digital and musical platforms in the About section of this episode. when and how did you get into music, and what is primarily your principal instrument? I'm interested to know if that also if magic was before, after, during, how did those things meet?
Okay, so um, magic and music for me really met, I would say, in my late teens. Growing up, my family wasn't especially religious, so I wasn't really either. Um, I started out singing. I love singing, and I picked up electric bass as well because I loved Rush at the time and thought Geddy Lee was awesome. Um, in my late teens, I started going through, I guess, a spirituality phase, but it was, I admit, a little new agey. Buying yoga and astrology books from the Books a Million, stuff like that. But the music I was writing at the time, the focus became more and more on this sort of what we were talking about the other day, an ecstatic experience. This kind of being so overwhelmed, so moved that I kind of lift up out of myself. I transcend my body, but I unite with the cosmos and a general purpose. That was what I was listening to music for, and that's what I was making music for. Um, then I found Nietzsche, and I kind of adopted his resentment towards traditional religions, the poison mixers and despisers of life. Um, and I tossed all the spirituality stuff like out the window. Um, my music went in a direction that was much more functional. It was focused on psychological health, it's focused on educating people, like helping people live well, rather than this ecstatic experience. Um, After that, I started going to college for music composition, and I was in the choir. And there was a whole lot of Christian influence. We played in churches, and it was like these people aren't really like Nietzsche told me they were. Some of these people were really loving, and just the culture was tremendous. Like these cathedrals, all the music they had. Um, but I was still struggling with things. I wrote a piece called His Holy Empire, where a damsel in distress starves to death, waiting for God to come save her. So I was still obviously having some issues. Um, but that summer, I I was hanging out by myself, and I decided to take some LSD, and I reflected, especially on the existentialism that I was espousing at the time, and it seemed kind of lame. The idea that we're all just monkeys jerking off on a rock until the sun explodes, and we can make it nice, like that just wasn't really holding water. So I guess you could say I had an existential crisis, and this, I guess, was my first intentionally magical act. I reached out. At the time, I just had this idea of God. I hadn't really started playing around with stuff much, but I reached out to God and I said, God, if you are real, if this matters, if being alive matters, give me a mission and I will celebrate you. The very next day, I came up with, just like suddenly came up with a large group of interconnected opuses where they make a kind of journey that's supposed to elicit a spiritual awakening in a person. Um, and my whole paradigm shifted immediately. I started listening like for a guide. Like I had a guide, and I was just following it. One thing I would do was I would go into the library, and I would just go in a random direction wherever I was compelled to, and I would stop where I was compelled to, and I would be met with a book that was relevant to my task. And at the time, I was getting really excited about mythology. There were a lot of interesting structures, and I was trying to apply those in the art. Um, so everything, I guess, got a little too difficult. I was trying to create my own universe. I wanted to tell the story of humanity and culture. Um, and the patterns and myths were becoming too much. Keeping track of all my projects were coming too much. And one day I had stayed up entirely too long, and I decided to go to the local theological seminary. I used to haunt their parking lot. Like in the middle of the night, I would just go there and sing and come up with stuff. Um, and I went there intending to pick a fight with a priest about whether or not or to basically convince me to keep doing this.
Uh-huh.
And I walk in this library. I'm barefoot. I'm probably dirty. I probably look terrible. Um, and I remembered I had been in that library 12 years before. I ran away from home, also barefoot. I can completely forgotten that. But I remember reading Genesis 1 as a kid. And so I'm in this library and I do the thing I normally do in libraries, which is just go in a random direction. And I am brought immediately to a book titled Cory's Ancient Fragments. It is spelled it is spelled Cory. And when I open it, it's crazy. It's all these alternative cosmogonies. It's got Orphic fragments. It's got the Chaldean oracles. It's got Proclus the Iamblichus. It's got old Phoenician and Chaldean cosmogonies. This thing just wrecked me. You know, that was my sign. Like I've got it. I've got my mission. Like thank you. So since then, I would say that my life has been completely magical in that I have a sort of divine task that everything is oriented around, and I'm constantly met with the means to accomplish this task.
That is a wonderful story. I love that. There's so many important points in there, you know. The you know, one of the most interesting things to me is your, you know, your involvement in the choir and kind of realizing like, oh, you know, the reality of a situation that I'm physically meeting and experiencing isn't necessarily matching up to the things I have read or have been told about it, which is super important. And because especially now, you know, we have a tendency to base a lot of our interaction or lack thereof with certain groups or people and things like that based off of these a priori assumptions, or just allowing, you know, whatever it is, my corner of the social media or whatever, you know, media I'm consuming to dictate to me what these people are and what they're about. And the reality situation is like, we're human beings, right? We're there's going to be shitty people in literally every sector of the fucking universe, to be honest with you. So it's just about, you can't paint everybody with a single brush, and I think that that's a beautiful thing to actually experience, particularly within the setting of a choir and things like that. But another really interesting thing to me is that you had almost this moment, and Dion Fortune kind of writes about it in her fiction, where like these characters are just kind of searching for meaning and wandering around in her novels, you know, wandering around in the courtyard of the London Museum, and they just you know, shouting, screaming to the night air, you know, for something. And that's the vibe I get when you tell me that you were standing in the parking lot wanting to pick a fight with a priest. That like fiery intentionality where you're literally screaming to God, just, you know, show me, you know. And really God will always answer, you know, because I've had similar situations as well. So that's a fantastic story, man. That's something, if you ever write a book one day, that'd be really good.
I definitely have some ideas with it. Yeah, it was kind of a horrifying and slightly traumatic experience, but it's a damn good origin story. That's for sure.
Yes, and it makes for a damn good podcast episode.
I do what I can. I do what I can.
So, so that's really interesting. But obviously, you know, we've listened to a piece of your music this morning. And I was wondering if you'd want to speak to that, or talk about that at all, now that we've kind of fleshed out a little bit of your origin story.
Um, yeah, I'd love to. I guess before diving into the music, it's probably helpful to explore the musical materials that I consecrated for the project.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
Yeah, one thing I notice a lot, everybody, all of us in the magical community, we need I don't know, do people, is that what people call materia? Just anything you use to do magic? I just say material, but
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I like some people would, I guess the more formal word would be like implements, but they're not always implements. Like if you're using, I kind of was at a period at a certain time too where I was a little new agey. I mean, I still am, but like this, I wouldn't consider this an implement, but I do ritual with this. So yeah, material.
yeah. And a lot of these materials are consecrated to the planets. The planets seem to be kind of the main things that people are operating with in the community and throughout history. Um, but the thing is, a lot of us are really poor, and being able to afford all these materials is difficult. So the nice thing about sound is it's mostly free. You have a voice, so you can make notes. You have a body you can hit, so you can make rhythms. You can just do it. Uh, so looking back, I saw that there were some musical correspondences with the planets. The vowels, for example, we've seen those in the 1400s. There was a music theorist who associated the seven diatonic modes with the planets, but I couldn't find much beyond that. So I figured I would make some new correspondences, because the way I see this is I don't think before the cosmos unfurled, the one was like, and frankincense will be connected to this, like somebody at some point thought that was a good idea and they established it, and maybe with divine aid, um, or maybe not, and it still has divine impact. um, so so I have a kind of cavalier and self-empowered approach to magical correspondences. If somebody could do it, I can do it, and so could you. um, so I went through and just associated as many things as I could see that were relevant to each planet. I associated pitch sets, which are things from pitch set theories, which is they're alternative ways of naming chords, I suppose. I associated all the possible triads and tetrads evenly throughout the planets. I associated rhythms, meters, intervals, pitches. Well, pitches, that's another old one that was already there. Um, but yeah, I went through and tried to make a sort of planetary music grimoire that people could use. And I've had people ask how I go about the consecration process, like how I know when it's good. And for me, it's I don't know how other people interact with divinities. I get kind of like an image and a feeling. I get like a character that shows up, and I know when I've like it's like, okay, this is going to be these are going to be Mars's pitch sets. When I found the right ones, there's like a feeling like a tingle, a glow that moves throughout my body, and it's almost like Mars or Ares is in the back of my head, like cheering, like he arrives and says good. There's like a conceptual like experience, and there is a physical experience that says like, okay, I did it right.
Amazing.
um I
That's
know you
fantastic.
I know you work with music a lot. Have you experimented with musical material like this?
Not to that extent. I have both created and commissioned music to be created for specific ceremonies. I would say that it's my approach to music has always been I'm a control freak. And that's, I do all my own editing. All the music on the podcast is stuff that I've made, and I've carried that over. But this collaboration you and I are having, I think is brilliant. This is one of my favorite aspects of anything. So I like to invite people into my space that I have sort of selected based on their merits and the things that I've seen, or a recommendation that has been kind of confirmed by uh, you know, Like, Allison Tchaikovsky put me onto your work, and immediately I was like, God, I have to talk to this guy, because I love your approach to music. You have a brilliance for music theory that I do not possess. I went to school for music theory as well, but I dropped out to go on tour for a little while. But so my the way that I approach music is very much so. I have an idea, and if I trust you, I'm going to ask you to come in, and then we're just going to, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. It's like this whole idea behind Enochian chess. There is, when you play Enochian chess, made by the Golden Dawn. For anybody who isn't familiar with that, I think you can pretty easily find some information on it on the internet, or either the Black Brick, the Golden Dawn. But you set up the board, and there's this sort of invocation, and you're one of the interesting things is that, like, the entire setup of the game, with all its rules and all its sort of its own kind of like mathematical algorithm, you're still allowing chance to participate in this project. As a matter of fact, it wouldn't be Magic without that random. I don't want to say chaos, but I want to say, the randomness. And for me, I've tried to mirror my own experience of life, which is that there is definitely a deterministic component, but there is also chance, free will. So that's more my experience with that stuff. But I will definitely say that, when you are tuned in to an intention and a particular energy, sort of tuned into that frequency, I will say that I've had experiences like the one you're describing. I think that you're describing it in a way that makes me like excited. It's very poetic. I love it. I think that's a brilliant thing. Like Aries in the back of your mind cheering, like you found it, like a eureka moment for them. That's excellent. It's one of the more cool things I've heard about from people who experiment with music and magic. I think you'd actually have a great conversation with Rudolf Berger. Do you know Rudolf? He's the host of Thought Hermes podcast.
I do not.
Yeah, so I actually just spoke to him last night, and he is super into sound as like sort of the spiritual component, and he's been doing theater and music for many decades. So he'll usually have somebody's piece of music that does magic and is more like, I would say that your stuff is composed orchestrally, which I love. He's a big proponent of that on his show. So I think I'm going to pass your music along to him if you don't mind.
Please do. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And you talking about your general process and inviting in chance. In a little bit here, I'll have to share my cosmogonic composition process, which is,
yes,
that's pretty much my main thing. That is my purpose. My purpose is to bring that back to people. But I use chance. Like I'll bind the parts of a project to tarot cards, and then I'll work on whatever I draw. So I'll use that to draw my attention. But anyway, these pieces. So I consecrated some musical materials. And then I thought I would use those musical materials in pieces for each of the planets. And this is my second opus, which is still undergoing. I've completed the sun and the moon parts for it. The experience of making these were both really interesting. The sun was just brutal, like onslaught. Ideas were there. They kept coming. It's go, 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 put it down. Like no second thoughts, just like instant success, and energy. And I was really, that was the first one I did. And I was really excited about how it seemed to kind of function like a spell, like in a sense, and its energizing faculties. That's what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to evoke the sun, to bring the sun to you, and then you can, do whatever you want with the sun, or let the sun do whatever it does with whatever you want done. Now the moon one was definitely very interesting. Before I even thought to do these planetary opuses, one evening I wanted to channel Hecate. Now I don't.
Wow.
I thought I'd have some fun.
Yeah.
I don't normally mess with actual like raw materials. Honestly, the gods just don't leave me alone as far as I'm concerned. They show up when they want, and also my cosmogonic composition process, that is essentially a spell that involves all these gods, so they're pretty much constantly present. But I thought I'd do it on the classical style with Hecate. So around 11 p.m., I can't remember what I used. It was garlic, and it was like some minced garlic out of the fridge too. Some kind of oil, and I think something else. And I buried them outside of my home.
Mm.
So nothing was happening. You know, it was around 2 in the morning. I was kind of working on stuff. And that's when she showed up. And it was intense. I've never had a strong of a character-based experience. Like imagine in your mind there's just this black area, like a stage.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's there while you're looking at everything and doing everything. She showed up there, and she was very vivid and very intense. She constantly shifted between three forms. There was a very seductive, like kind of regal maiden queen. There was this like really gnarly looking old woman who she looked kind of similar to the witch in Snow White.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
And the ways that that these gods are presenting themselves to me, I don't think that this is the way they all are, but it's using things that I know. You know,
Right.
It's talking to me in a language I understand.
Yeah, I like to call that using your available imagery.
There you go. Yeah. To tangent for a second, a big thing for me, you know, when people ask me if I'm a pagan or like how I approach polytheism, really, I think that there's a one, and that this one is as interested in reaching out to us as we are to it, and it comes to us however we're able to receive it. So you know, if we speak, you know, like God speaks to some people in Hebrew and to some in Greek and some in English, but even beyond that, you know, I think when I don't think Hecate was around at the beginning of the cosmos, but I think once somebody reached out to the divine, expecting Hecate, that the divine met them in the close of Hecate, and in that meeting, Hecate was born and is now an entity running around. But yeah, it's like an emanational panentheism sort of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, no,
But
I mean, to be honest with you, that's a really good way to sum up also the way I see it as well. I think that you have a very good way of, you've clearly very, you've thought about these things, which is excellent, you know, like it's because it's, you know, you can explain them very well.
I do try. Thank you. Oh, and to go back to Hecate's visit here, her third form was like this like fucked up beast. Excuse my language.
No, it's fine.
It was just this monstrous thing that's hard to like distinguish. Like its features kept shifting, and like at one point it like vomited up this sac that was still like connected to it, that had all these like tumorous like masses just pulsing. And when I recoiled at that, I think Hecate thought that was kind of funny, and then would just do that every now and then to spook me. And that was an interesting thing about the relationship, is she was kind of teasing me a lot. You know, like she'd kind of like lure me in with the seductive like maiden, and then suddenly like jump in my face with the hag, or, you know, once learning that the monster freaked me out, just vomit that. But anyway, I was taken on a little journey, and I thought that this was going to be for Hecate music I would be writing. It started out, and this was a very like I was just in my living room, but the experience was that I had in my mind was so vivid. I feel like I was living that more than I was living in my living room. It started out, I was in a really dark, misty, crowded wood. I'm walking along, and there are all these bugs and sounds going on around me. This life around me that's unsettling me and scaring me. I finally break through the brush into an open clearing, and it's like a glade. There's a small body of water in the center that is still, and it is reflecting the moon from above. I walk to the body of water, and I look down into it, and I see myself. And then I go face first into the water, and I am floating in. It was basically like space, like mixed space and like infinite water. I was just floating in water. And then she left. And I was like, okay. I tried to make some Hecate music, but I kept getting the feeling like I wasn't ready. So fast forward a little bit, and I've made my sun piece, and I go to make my moon piece, and I want it to be something that's like emotional, that's a little enchanting. I want to make it something that makes people. I want to make it something that's kind of healing, like a little soothing. And I think back to the journey that Hecate took me on, and I realized that's my structure. That's my moon piece. She was giving me the moon piece. I planned out every one of the planetary pieces. I planned out the structure, like they all have a 3-act structure. And this was 3 acts. It fit perfectly. Now, after I had composed it, not just composed it, I finished it, mastered, mixed. I was going to, right after I finished, I was going to listen to it for the first time, which is, a wonderful feeling. That's always super exciting. And I looked at Facebook real quick, and I don't know if you know who Sarah Mastros is. She's
sorry, I was muted. Yeah, I do. Yeah.
No, she's a wonderful person. But there was just a simple post that said, "Go look at the moon." So I took my headphones and I went outside, and much to my surprise, there was a blood moon. It was a big, fat, red moon. And there were a bunch of people out in the parking lot of my apartment complex looking as well. Now, I had been struggling with something for a while. I had been depressed. I think that's just the easiest way to put it. A lot of people think being depressed is being sad, but really it's kind of being locked away from feelings. At least it was for me. And the ecstasy that I used to seek in music, that always had lots of tears associated with it. I had been kind of cut off from that. I couldn't cry to music anymore. I hadn't, at least in years and years. And as soon as the music starts, I'm looking at this blood moon, tears just pour, like a dam broke. And I just danced and cried in the parking lot while a bunch of people probably wondered what the hell was going on. But I felt her, I saw her. She was silvery white, long hair, her eyes closed in peace. She had her hands out, and she was just pouring this sparkly, starry water over me, just washing me, making me a baby again. And it worked. I have been able to cry to music since then. I made a spell for myself. Hecate gave me some of the tools, and then Selene said, here you go. And I think that's something that's really interesting, and that I didn't think about it until just now, but the 2 functions of music that I used to pursue, the ecstatic and then the healing, I guess, health.
Yeah.
Both of those were super present in that moment. but yeah, that was such an incredible experience for me.
Yeah, I mean that's it it's interesting to me that she leaves you in this kind of like watery womb, almost like the the womb of Nut, the night sky, the darkness of space, to not only gestate there but to accumulate the watery, the like we're saying, the tears and the lunar and the emotional aspect, and uh sort of the inspiration of that little sliver of silver sunlight that the moon deposits in the darkness of night. It's very beautiful. And these are the experiences that are available to practitioners of magic, people like once you allow that belief in, that, and really to go searching for the experience like you did, is such a common it's such a common theme in people that I speak to on this podcast and otherwise, just people I have met throughout the years in magic. It's always, there's like there's a commonality there where it's like and I don't want to get too I don't want to get too close to Campbell here. But it is pretty, it's pretty phenomenal, the fact that that tends to be this genesis point, this intense desire that is expressed outwardly. Because I think a lot of us keep that as some sort of unspoken hopelessness for a really long time. We want to have these experiences, we want to believe, but there's this quietude that we allow ourselves to exist in, that kind of, like you're saying, turns into this numbness to things. But when you actively kind of allow that intention to be screamed to the universe, and then you can begin invoking things, and experiencing, uh having the experiences, and everyone's going to have them differently. It's not this cookie cutter thing, but they'll have consonances. But I think, yeah, it's amazing. And to allow your music to have essentially what is divine inspiration, that highest aspect of the natural cosmos, that domain of creativity and of life growth, decay, that Hecate embodies, has now imprinted your sphere with something you have created and expressed. That's like the highest form of religion to me.
Yeah, agreed. And you were saying something. You said something about you've met so many people that just have these like screaming outs for the connection, and you also talked about the numbness that can occur without that connection. And that's why, part of the reason I made these musical materials is to try to engender accessibility. Like, I think that everybody can do this stuff and everyone should be able to. And, people shouldn't require a ton of money. They shouldn't require like 60 years of dedicated like research. Research is good. I like research, and we stand on the shoulders of giants, and all that. But but really, I just want people to be able to do this stuff, and if they don't have the means to make their own means, and let them know that's just as viable. And that's probably one of my biggest forms of activism, I guess, in the broader esoteric community, is anytime I see people saying you can't do this and like you're wrong, I like to go fight them, because I'm trying to think about the health of everyone that's involved. To me, that's what a good community leader does, is they care for the community. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely. Um, and there is a lot of magic nowadays. The community, um, uh, it's great in a lot of ways. It's great. The community itself is really great, and the available resources, the amount of serious erudition that is currently available on these things, is something that's relatively unprecedented.
Absolutely.
But there's still there's this snag on in the internet, There always will be. There'll always be some kind of difficulty to navigate for the
Monkeys are always going to be monkeys, I think, is
right.
the way to put it. We're always going to have these natural like tendencies. There's always going to be tribalisms, in groups,
Right.
out groups. I think that's the main, well, I'd say that's the main issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the groups that are saying that you can't do. I'm a big proponent on you shouldn't, but go ahead. If there's certain things I think that I for safety's sake, I think a lot of people maybe should take it's kind of like music, right? Like you went to school for music and you're able to create these things. And you don't need to go to school for music, but at a certain point, there is an apprenticeship that's required. You have to learn the basics, and it's not until you really have a firm foundation in the basics that you realize, like, oh, this gives me the freedom to create on a completely different level. Like, I can be a completely different musician that's actually not bound. I'm not bound to the notes on the page. They're helpful instruments. They're helpful, I can utilize them as a tool for my self-expression and things like this. But I think that's a period that every as like, even as like a tradesman, somebody like myself apprenticing as a carpenter for a year and a half. If I were to go and take on a massive project, I probably wouldn't know whether to shit or go blind until I had my apprenticeship under my belt, and then I could basically be like, yeah, I'll bid you a house. but
No,
I
that's
think, yeah.
a great point.
But I think, yeah, the thing is, there's so many like you're saying, in groups that are vying for the communal dialogue, and it can get really easy to get lost as a newcomer to Magic. Now it's like super easy to not even know where to begin, right? Like, maybe
And you might wind up with some Nazis if you weren't careful.
exactly. So it's good to have people in the community, like yourself, that are taking that responsibility on to, like, go and parry a little bit. I think we shouldn't be afraid to kind of draw the sword in a way that is helpful, in defense, really, of people, not in offense.
Always, always.
Yeah.
Justice, not revenge.
Right. Yeah. It's a great point. So one thing that I did want to touch on is that you've done some translation work, right?
Yes.
So that to me is fascinating, especially you translate Koine Greek. That's correct?
I
Attic.
mostly Attic, I would say. But
Okay.
a lot of the text that I do translate use like a kind of blend of dialects.
That's excellent. So you did kind of dovetailing here with your Planetary opus, and the piece that we've played. You did some translation work on a small treatise on in the Alison Tchaikovsky, I believe. She kind of wrote a little bit of the spell and how to work with it, and then some commentary. But you translated the section of the PGM. It was the spell to Helios, right?
Hmm.
And so what got you into translation? I mean, do you have an education in it, or?
Uh, no, I taught myself to read ancient Greek at that theological seminary I mentioned earlier. They let me have my own little desk that was constantly stacked with books. Um, but
That's great.
I think the so okay. As a poet, I am also a poet, and I do spend quite a bit of time with poetry. I know that if you want to understand a poem, you really got to approach it in its original language, or you at least need to have its original language on hand to reference while you're reading a translation. Um, because a lot of nuances can get lost. Um, I mean, I can't remember the inciting incident, but I do remember a couple times being seriously like upset when I realized that someone took some liberties that altered, the symbols that were actually being expressed in a text. And the way that I work with a lot of these cosmogonies and hymns, those are the things I'm mostly interested in. Basically, anything that seems like it's using this cosmic this demiurgic paradigm, I guess. Um, uh, every term is important. The order of terms are important. Just these things are critical, and sometimes a translation might translate the same term differently in two places, and you won't know that it's happening twice, and all these things are important. So I got into translation first because I just wanted to know, like, I want to know what's going on here. And I also knew that while English has it has so many words. You have so many words that can mean so many specific things. If you want to pinpoint one thing, you can do it in English. But in the ancient world, there was a necessary economy of terms. People didn't have dictionaries hanging around. There was a smaller vocabulary, but these words were used in more ways. Like I'm trying to think of a good one. I mean, like the tell us has like about 10 different uses. So these original words have all these meanings. And polysemy, or a double entendre would be an example of polysemy. Polysemy is the poet's bread and butter. Like, that's what we do. We try to say the most with the least. So being able to see what the original term was, I have so many more nuances of meaning, so many more shades of understanding that can be carried by the words. So really, yeah, I just wanted to be able to understand what was going on, and the translations that I do. I do really appreciate people who do pretty translations, who try to bring something into English and they add artistry to it. They take a few liberties. There's nothing wrong with that at all. But when it comes to analysis, like serious research, it doesn't cut it. So the translations I make, I try to stick to the text as much as possible. I do everything I can. Like, I preserve word order. I preserve the actual terms being used. I don't interject anything. I don't cut anything out. I just want to make something that is as clear an English representation of what originally happened. And that's also why in my translations, words that do have these polysemic potentials, I will list them in the footnotes so you can see. Really, my goal in translation is to bring people as close to the Greek as possible without reading it.
Yeah, that's a really useful thing to actually have the different shades of translation as footnotes and stuff. Actually, there's something called the Parallel Bible that I use occasionally. It's called Parallel Amplified. So essentially, you have King James on one side, and then you have a more modern academic translation, like side by side. And then what they'll do is it won't just be so on the more right, because all this stuff, particularly the New Testament, was all written in Greek as well. And I use Greek's or Strong's Greek Concordance, the lexicon as well, to kind of comb these things occasionally. But it's basically the King James on one side, and then this amplified version, a modern translation that doesn't give just one translation of a sentence or a word that can be translated 3 or 4 different ways. It gives the actual multiple different ways that it could be translated. I find that extremely helpful. And again, it allows for this kind of intuitive interpretation of what is essentially scripture, and I think that having that option for you to be, it's kind of the same way a piece of music can be translated or interpreted or grafted into the person for different reasons at different stages in their life and stuff like that. But so you also do work on the Orphic hymns, correct? Or the Homeric hymns?
Oh, I'm messing with a Homeric hymn right now, but I do work with Orpheus and Orphic texts. That's my main focus. I feel like Orpheus, whoever he or they were, they was most interested in the cosmogony I'm after, which is the poetic, the creative cosmogony. To say real quick though, if I can backpedal, you were
Please.
talking about the Bible, and I thought of a great example for being able to engage something in its original terminology, because I have gone through Genesis 1 in the Hebrew. My Hebrew is definitely not as good as my Greek, but I have a general I have a linguistics knowledge, and I have my own little translation system. So give me any language and I'll be able to figure it out with a little bit of effort. But in Genesis 1, okay, so a lot of Hebrew roots, they have things called triconsonantal roots, where it's three consonants, and you get all these different words by putting different vowel sounds between them. There are exactly 6 in Genesis 1 that are used as a noun and a verb. Each one of them is used as a noun and a verb. There's seed and sow. There's herb and I think it's grow. Um, I'm on the spot. I'm killing myself here. There's a third one. There's a third one that is plant oriented. Then there are things that swarm, and they're swarming. There's things that creep, and there's creeping. And there's things that fly, and there's flying. So what do you get when you take these 6 words that are expressed in 2 ways? You you get a little table. You've got a column of your 3 you have a column of your 3 little vegetable ones, and you have a column of your 3 little animal ones, which itself superimposes over the 6 days of Genesis 1 themselves, considering they make columns themselves.
Wow.
And each one is expressed in 2 ways. What happens when we multiply 6 by 2? We get 12. And what is the zodiac if not something that is divided into 2, 3, 4, and 6? You can you don't see the 4 there, but I could show you. But basically, what I'm saying is, by engaging Genesis 1, like with Hebrew in mind, I was able to find a pattern just in these 6 terms that sort of also represent the whole, like the kind of the entirety of it. It's like an additional key. I call them structures. But yeah, that's neat stuff, and that's what I'm excited about. I'm looking at puzzles. I want to be able to engage puzzles.
And it's so important too, because you've got a mind that's really great with systems, just from some of the previous things that you and I have spoken about, sort of off camera, I guess. But you also have the intuitive ability to make sense of this stuff and not get lost because of the musical training. And I don't even say it's probably not because of the musical training. If anything, the musical aspect, I think, is it's an expression of our inherent personas. So you've got that piece in there too, and that's really important in being able to parse spiritual texts, particularly in Greek and Hebrew, because they all did the same thing. Because a lot of people don't understand about. I don't speak ancient Greek, but I speak modern Greek, and even still, there's more room in the syntax for really poetics, right? Is that and what is poetics if it's not the making space for inspiration, which is randomness, because you never know what's going to come through, right? That's the brilliant thing about inspiration. You don't know what's going to come through. But I do know what you're talking about. I've approached the like the Sefer Yetzirah in a similar capacity, which is great because it's a Kabbalistic document, so it's definitely going to have that flavor. But I think that the 3, when talking about God creating the universe from the Hebrew alphabet, and in each one of those, which again ties exactly into what we're talking about, right? Because in the Judeo-Christian conception, God says, "Let there be light." So he's creating with words and letters and things like that. But they use that tri-consonant root for sefer, sephor, and sipor. So it's I believe it's samek pei resh. But and each three of those means writing, number, and speech. So there's so many different ways to interpret it. If you were just pointing at one, you'd say, "Oh well, it's speech." But you wouldn't have the idea of number and writing in there, and that's like super important, particularly when parsing like these texts that we're talking about, biblical Hebrew, because the Hebrew numbers had ideas or the Hebrew letters had ideas and numbers associated with them, which is it's really cool. And because it ties into this occult philosophy of speech, of writing. Some people think to themselves, like, oh yeah, magic is BS because what's the big deal? You drew a triangle on a piece of paper. It's like, well, according to this,
it's a pretty triangle.
It's a beautiful triangle, and it's bright green on a red background. So, but there's this idea that like, no, these things all have potency because they're all expressions of God. But yeah, that's awesome. I'm glad that we can talk about stuff like that. That's very that tends to be something modern people get tripped up on. So I have a canned question that I ask everybody. And now typically I ask everyone based on the stuff we've spoken about today over our little sliver of time you've given me very graciously. What would you recommend in terms of 3 books that people could learn more about the things we've spoken about? Now, here's the thing. I think I want to also incorporate for you artists or piece of music. What maybe creative artists. They could be visual, they could be sound artists, and please feel free to recommend some of your own work. That's
This is rough.
It's a spot question. I give it to everyone.
Yeah. Let me think here. I mean, yeah, my music is good. You should definitely check that out.
It is good.
My first opus is a sort of love letter to the zodiac, but it also features the components, the main cosmic components that make up the zodiac that we see in like the Sefer Yetzirah and a lot of other things. But I think I would probably have to try to pick some texts that I think would be a great place to start. Mm-hmm. And I've been having a time with the Homeric hymn to Hermes the past week or two. It is like Hermes is taking me on a ride here. It's got so much I've been looking for, so much I'm aware of. It's playing out the cosmic paradigm. There are solar cycles. You get there's I don't want to spoil anything, but I would say that's one of them. I would say Genesis 1 is another, just because there's so much in it, and it's a self-contained text. You know how because Genesis 2:3 or 2:4, when the second creation story with Adam starts.
Right, exactly. A lot of people aren't aware of that. There are 2 completely different creation stories. Yeah,
exactly. This first one's like, it's a little like thesis statement, but it's self-contained, and that's what I think people need to engage with, is like a text where they can look at it only as a thing in itself. Like, don't worry about anything else. If this is a solvable puzzle, then the author made it to be solved. You just have to be smart. So we've got Homeric hymn to Hermes, Genesis 1, and then I would say I call it the Orphic great hymn to Zeus. It's a 32-line poem that we have because of Aristotle mentions it. Um, uh, I can't remember the name. There's another there's another guy. His name starts with an E. He was kind of a pagan detractor. He talks about it, and also Proclus
Okay.
mentions it.
So they're kind of, so is, I'm assuming that's what we're talking about mainly here is in the Platonic tradition.
That's where we ended up getting it, but it's really the thing with Orphic stuff is it's so hard to get authentic text because this stuff
Yeah.
is older. And a lot of the stuff we read, like the Orphic hymns, that's a later thing. That's like first or second century AD. And you know, there's all this stuff about the Orphic rhapsodies and Dionysus getting dismembered. I think a lot of those are Neoplatonic inventions. I think the Neoplatonists love what they found, but they also did what they wanted with it. And
Mhm.
they weren't afraid to add things on. I mean, like the Chaldean oracles are not Chaldean. Like these.
Right. No, not at all. Not, especially not in the way we have them today. We don't actually have the original. We don't have the ones that they were talking about. We have the ones that like they were quoting, you know. So it's like we don't have the actual Chaldean oracles that they were using. We have the things they wrote about the Chaldean oracles, you know. So
If they actually existed, if they weren't just like, you know, kind of making stuff up together. So
right.
that can happen.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I would say that the Great Hymn to Zeus jives most with the Derveni Papyrus, which I think is the oldest papyrus we have. It's a fairly recent discovery of 26 columns of an Orphic text, and it is awesome. It's fragmented to all hell. Half of every column has been burned up in a fire, but it's that very
Wow.
fire that it created a chemical reaction that stopped the text from being destroyed by time. You know, and it was sealed in a grave. So yeah, the Great Hymn to Zeus, I would say, is our best complete sense of an older Orphic idea, and a lot of it jives really wonderfully with Genesis 1. Zeus is described as a cosmic body.
Mm.
You know, there's a 2-line coda at the end, like every Orphic hymn has, where they, you know, just wrap it up. But 30 lines are split definitely into 10 or 3 10-line sections
Mm.
that correspond. Like the first section is very conceptual. The second section is just on the head of Zeus, but his head is the cosmos, and like the sun and the moon are his eyes. And then the third is very material, focused on his body and like the swamps and the air. But you get a really classic thing of like the conceptual, the celestial, and then the material that we see in Agrippa,
Yes.
that we see in the structure of Poimandres. That's just looking at these 3 groups of 10 lines just themselves shows this sort of Venn diagram of the conceptual and material coming together. So yeah, I would say that is an excellent place to go. Additionally, because you know, the things in Sefer Yetzirah, I call it the esoteric alphabet, and like Hebrew is literally an alphabet. But when I talk about, you know, the zodiac and the elements and the planets, that's the alphabet
Yes.
we kind of work with. And I would say that the Homeric hymn to Hermes, Genesis 1, and the Orphic Great Hymn to Zeus are all excellent self-contained resources of that have this alphabet kind of encoded in them if you're clever enough to piece things together.
Right. And a lot of cosmogony there. That's so for anyone listening, is there anything else you've got going on that you want to just mention, or anywhere that you want to direct them to check more of your stuff out?
Okay. So my fiance and I, we do run an esoteric arts business that's on a little bit of a hiatus right now. It's called The Shining Lyre.
Mhm.
It should get back up and running in a month or two. You can find it at theshininglyre.com. If you'd like to listen to my music, you can find most of it at soundcloud.com/cc composition. You can also find my first opus and bits of the second opus, The Sun and Moon, on the Shining Lyres Bandcamp. Just go to Bandcamp and search for the Shining Lyre. Uh, and yeah, and I will say that on the Shining Liars website right now, you can find my translation of the Orphic Great Hymn to Zeus, and you can find a blog I wrote about some of the structures in Genesis 1. Oh, and forgive me. Also, I am working on a series of 6 esoteric exegesis courses, and I'm also working on a handbook for them. I'm calling it Hermes Handbook of Esoteric Exegesis. So basically, I built a research system, a system specifically designed for mythical and magical texts, for kind of teasing out the inner structure, and really like the system that each represents. So I'm very very embroiled in that in the moment.
Awesome. Well, Cory Childs, thank you so much, man, for coming on today and for talking with me. This has been incredible fun for me. It's a real treat to get to talk music and magic and Greek mythology and Greek language. You know, there's so much I think that we have in common. I appreciate you, and I hope to speak to you on this podcast again relatively soon.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.